Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Think of New York City and many people think of food. The city's famous for great restaurants and foodie hangouts. But did you know that New York City is home to some top food deserts too? To name just one, the largest fresh food wholesale market in the United States is in Hunts Point in the Bronx. Yet there are no supermarkets to be found in the surrounding neighborhoods, and good fresh produce is hard to come by for local residents. Our next guest is hoping to make a dent in that problem with a community-supported agriculture project that puts low and middle-income residents at the center of its plan. It's designed by the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, headed up by Joel Berg. Joel joins me now. He's also the author of All You Can Eat: How Hungry is America? So Joel, let's start with the big picture. How hungry is America?
America has 49 million residents living in homes that can't afford enough food, and nearly 17 million American children. Now, they're not starving to death the way you might see in Somalia or North Korea or Honduras. They're choosing between food and rent, choosing between food and medicine, and we have the highest level of food insecurity and hunger out of any Western industrialized democracy. So America's quite hungry.
We're supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world.
We are the richest country in the history of the world in aggregate, but you know, if you average my salary and Bill Gates, I'm a billionaire, so averages don't mean everything.
What is the picture in New York City?
In New York City, there are 1.4 million people living in households that can't afford enough food, with 500,000 American children just here in New York City. This is a city with 53 billionaires. So many billionaires they don't all fit on the Forbes 400 list. Their combined net worth is over $180 billion, 3 times the city budget, and yet 1 in 5 of our children can't afford enough food.
So how does it happen? I mean, how do you end up with a food desert? And do you like that term?
Well, it's not a precise term, but it's better than any other term we have. You end up with it because of a lot of stereotypes that food companies have had that believe that low-income people don't deserve better food, just as a lot of food companies a few decades ago believed people with dark skin should go to a different entrance in a supermarket. So some people say this is all driven by the free market, and I think some of this is driven by stereotypes. And so there are large swaths of New York City, large swaths of America, including rural areas, that do not have fresh, affordable, nutritious food available, and particularly very little produce.
So talk a little bit about the South Bronx. It's one of the poorest counties in the United States, one of the highest levels of inequality, highest levels of hunger, and yet it has the nation's largest wholesale market, Hunts Point, with more fruits and vegetables and meat, I think, than any other market in the country, and second only to the West Coast, I think, in terms of fish.
Well, this is a story throughout the world that where food is produced is not always enjoyed by the people who surround it or where it's distributed. A bunch of years ago, I was on vacation in Costa Rica overlooking a huge ship of bananas being shipped probably to the United States, and the place I was eating had old, moldy bananas. And that's what you see in the Bronx. There is food in the Hunts Point market that's distributed all throughout New York City, but just within a earshot of that, you cannot necessarily buy the best food that's available at the market.
And that's where your CSA Fresh Food Project comes in. Now, CSA, what's that stand for?
CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. What it was designed to do when the CSA movement started in the last few decades is help small, regional, organic, family farmers stay in business by providing their costs up front and redistributing the risk from the farmers to the consumers. Now, that works great for upper income people, but it really doesn't work for middle income and particularly low income people who don't have the money to pay up front.
Now, some people in the States might be familiar with this model. They receive a box every week or so from a local farmer. They know the farmer. That relationship is cherished. But it is a pretty upper middle class thing, I think, isn't it?
In general, CSAs either ignore low income people or sort of have them as an afterthought, that we designed this project. Oh, now let's see if we can get some low income people involved. We design these projects with low income people as the centerpiece.
So how does that look different on the ground?
A, it has a distribution site in the heart of a low-income neighborhood on Grand Concourse in the Bronx. B, it has distribution hours that work for low-income people, most of whom are working, so we distribute into the evening hours. And C, it has prices that are affordable. We subsidize the low-income shares, and we accept food stamp SNAP benefits.
So if the market folks were right. What people would be wanting from their farmers is fried food, processed food, high caloric value food. What are they actually asking for?
If you build it, they will come. Our CSAs prove if you make healthier food affordable and physically available, people will line up to eat it, even very low income people. I must say, this is a stereotype upper class liberals who are white share with many conservatives. They just think there's something wrong with low income people. They're not shopping well enough. They're not cooking well enough. It's their own darn fault. They're obese and hungry. And our projects prove that's just not the case. Low income people know what's good for their families. They just can't afford it, and it doesn't exist in their neighborhoods.
And when they're providing to the low-income families, can the farmers that you're also helping with this project still make a profit?
The farmers do make a profit. In fact, they make much more of a profit because they sell directly to the consumers instead of having to go through middlemen who take a huge cut. At least one of our farmers in our projects, and we have a number of sites around the city, is a first-generation immigrant who came here originally as a farm worker and now runs a farm. So that is a bit of the American dream success story that's been wiped out for too many new immigrants, that still a glimmer of hope for some.
So in your picture of how the food economy in a city like New York could be different, what's your dream? What's your vision of what it would look like, where we would have a strong local food economy in this place?
It's certainly helpful to get more local and regional food, and I often call it regional food because a lot of the food that New Yorkers buy at farmers markets is from the Finger Lakes, is from the upper Hudson River Valley, is from central New Jersey or Pennsylvania. So it's really more accurately regional.
So a few 500-mile radius kind of thing.
That's certainly helpful, but it's also no substitute for ensuring that we have an economy that creates more jobs and ensures they pay a living wage and ensures that there's an adequate government safety net for those for whom the wages aren't enough. I happen to like citrus in the winter, and none of that's ever going to be local, and we have a lot less scurvy in the world because of that. And so we have to look where local and regional makes sense, and we certainly support that fervently at the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, but we also have to understand that modernity has some benefits, and as horrible as parts of the international food system are, there's certainly benefits that we have more diversity and more nutritious food year-round.
The reason I said that your project makes a dent in the problem is because I've read your stuff. And as much as you focus on projects like this and relieving and alleviating hunger, you also say this is a much bigger problem.
The reason we do projects like this is not only to help the few hundred or the few thousand people might be helped, but to set a policy model to get the federal government on the stick, the state government on the stick, the city government on the stick, to have much more widespread programs to make this a reality. Programs like this should be an entitlement as part of the food stamp SNAP program. Every one of the 47 million Americans on the SNAP program should have more purchasing power within that program to be able to participate in CSAs and farmers markets.
So what kinds of things can policymakers do? I was just in Appalachia where the local people in eastern Kentucky were pushing their legislators to pass or at least implement a law that I think had been passed where people could actually get double their value from their food stamps if they shopped at the local food market.
That's a great program. We have it in New York City. We'll certainly be calling on Mayor de Blasio, who's doing a lot of great progressive things on food and poverty issues, to expand that, but it's really a federal responsibility. Ultimately, because they have the money and they can print the bucks, and they can make the wealthy across this country pay their fair share to make sure Americans don't go hungry. There was a small pilot project in the recent Farm Bill that supports this kind of extra food purchases at farmers markets, but honestly, some colleagues of mine in the food movement were really duped. They got a few million through this program and they were jubilant, even though billions and billions and billions were cut out of the program for overall food for low-income, hungry Americans. So we can't be distracted by little pilot projects. We've got to keep our eye on the ball that if low-income people get the money through work or through a safety net, they're going to be able to buy the healthier food, and that'll drive a more just food system.
Do I hear raise wages?
Raise wages. We strongly support an increase in the minimum wage, even though donors to our group and many other hunger groups are some of the entities that rely on lower wage positions. We strongly believe that if you're a conservative and you're against food stamps, against SNAP, against WIC, against all the things we fight for, then surely you should support an increase in the minimum wage, which wouldn't cost the government a penny and would significantly reduce hunger in America.
You presented a plan to Mayor de Blasio of what you would like him to implement in his administration here in New York City. You want to just give us a thumbnail of what that is, and is it applicable around the country?
It is applicable around the country as well as much of the world. It's a call to raise wages, which the mayor is supporting, create jobs, which the mayor is supporting, increase access to nutrition assistance benefits by taking away false, discriminatory, honestly racially tinged barriers against access to taxpayer-funded programs, and increasing child nutrition programs. So they haven't done it all yet, but they've made a good start, and we're optimistic, although part of our job is to hold them and every other elected official accountable to get it done.
Why are you so passionate about this, Joel?
My question is, why isn't everybody? 49 million of our neighbors live in households that can't afford enough food. Forget the morality of it. Forget that every religious tradition on the planet, every secular tradition on the planet talks about making reduction of poverty and hunger a centerpiece. It's just in our economic self-interest. No country has remained a vibrant country in the history of the world if it's failed to adequately feed its own people. It's just survival.
Do you think the world has any idea of this side of the U.S. reality?
I think the people who are experiencing it do, and I think much of the rest of the world is shocked when they come and speak to me from the media across the world or delegations of experts who sometimes come and meet with me, and they just can't believe this country that's supposed to have streets paved with gold, that everyone is Donald Trump. They are unbelievably flabbergasted that we have this problem here. I tell the story in my book of walking around Bamako, Mali in West Africa, one of the lowest income countries on the planet, even though one of the richest countries culturally. And the guy there just couldn't believe that he's walking through the streets of Bamako talking to me that I work on hunger issues, because he just refused to believe we had it here. And I explained to him much of what he got for free, or he got because he lived on land, he collected firewood himself. You don't have to pay rent in many places. It's subsistence, so it's a different kind of problem here.
Joel, thank you so much for the work you do and for coming into Grit TV.
Thank you.